Well, I guess it was only a matter of time before I got around to answering questions about one of the most complex and interesting horror films of all time, Cabin in the Woods. And I figured what better place to come and talk about it than an actual old cabin out in the middle of the woods. I don't know, maybe I should go inside and see if there's anything in there. I mean, it's just an old cabin. I'm sure there's nothing of merit there.
Question number 1.
What happened back in 1998?
So, I guess, spoilers, but Cabin in the Woods is about an ancient group whose job it is to appease the old gods by arranging a yearly sacrifice of 5 archetypes to it. If the sacrifice is completed, the old ones sleep. But if not, they then rise and destroy humanity. Now, the movie details the efforts of an American group, but they make it clear that there are several other facilities around the world, and each one does their own version of the ritual to cover as many bases as they can. Like they mention that the Stockholm one went south and didn't work, and that all of the other ones were equally unsuccessful, which means that only the US and Japan remain as viable. And if one of the 2 of them don't make the sacrifice work, then it's wakey wakey. It's also said that the Japanese have a perfect record and that the US has only failed once before due to an incident in '98. So, was that a reference to anything in particular? Or was it just thrown out there, perhaps to sow the seeds for a prequel? I mean, that's probably somewhat likely, but here's the thing, and I'm gonna get way into this a little later, but this movie is about movies. It's about the making of films and watching of them. So it's hard to think that there's not some sort of specific commentary being made here. So, let's look at the horror films of '98 and see if there's an American one that fits the bill. Keep in mind, it doesn't have to be specifically a film about 5 people in a cabin in the woods. It just has to be something where the archetypes are appeased, but one in which things go wrong and those archetypes survive. The interesting thing here is that there's a film from '98 called The Cabin, and the plot is literally that 6 teens go up to a cabin for a getaway and end up encountering evil stuff. Some online have commented about how similar the film appears to be to Cabin in the Woods, but it's more like that film is similar to The Evil Dead or like 300 other films with that same setup, which is the very thing that this film is alluding to. I highly doubt that it's a reference to that film, since it's not really known and feels like it would be a real deep cut for them to be making mention of. However, most people tend to feel like it's specifically a tip of the hat to 1998's The Faculty. It fits with the theme since there are all 5 of the archetypes necessary that are present. There's Delilah, the whore, Stan, the jock, Casey, the scholar, Zeke is the fool, and Stokely is the virgin. It fits as well, considering that even though it looks like those characters are doomed, they managed to survive thanks to the use of Zeke's drug that he invented. That fits with them saying that the ritual's failure was due to an error with the chem department, and could tie into the fact that in this movie, Marty's weed seems to hinder the facility's manipulations, so drugs clearly interfere. The reason I don't like this theory is that we miss the elements of the Harbinger and the crew picking their own form of punishment. But it's also possible that sort of thing happened off screen or even before the film started, kicking off the events. But it's also hard to call this a failure, especially when I get into what I think the old ones are. But it was successful at the box office and made a good amount of money, even if it was less than they had hoped. But it would be hard to call the film a failure. So here's what I think. If we're rolling with the notion that the rituals are films and things we've seen, it's my take that we didn't get to see the '98 incident because it didn't work. The film's existing is evidence of their success. So the fact that the '98 attempt didn't work means it doesn't actually exist for us to see. Again, prequel, right?
I mean, I've got ideas, so, call me. You're not going to call me, are you?
Question number 2.
So then, who are the old gods?
On the base level, it's most likely that the Ancient Ones are a nod to H.P. Lovecraft and Cthulhu and friends. And side rant, Old Fishface is often considered the big bad of the whole mythos, but he's not even close. Cthulhu is one of the great old ones, and they're pretty big and badass, but they're nothing compared to the outer gods like Azathoth and Yog-Sothoth. Those dudes are the real boss fights. But yeah, the Ancient Ones are sort of this powerful race of beings that were here long before us, sleeping under the earth and requiring blood sacrifices each year, or else they'll get up and cause a little chaos. A lot of chaos, actually. But this movie isn't just about that kind of stuff. It's not a straightforward, here's the monsters and bad guys kind of film. It's about subtext and meta-commentary, so it requires a little extra bit of introspection. So, what I think is that the Ancient Ones are us, the audience, horror fans. Every year we require more. We desire a sacrifice of these specific types of characters, these particular scenarios that we enjoy over and over again. There's a comment made along the way about how it used to be as simple as throwing a girl into a volcano, but now, clearly, the tastes have changed and things have gotten more specific because the audience's tastes have changed. We like seeing this particular group of archetypes meeting their ends through whatever means. It's a distraction that's needed to keep us occupied. But the ritual has to be the same. It has to be completed in a way that we like. And if it's not, well, there'll be hell to pay. Think about how much scorn is thrown out there when a film doesn't go in the way that we expect it to. The negativity that surrounds it is usually nuts. In this whole commentary, the facility is basically the filmmaking crew, setting up scenarios and ensuring that everything goes to plan to keep us at bay, and sleeping, deadly afraid that something is out of place and the old gods are displeased and, heaven forbid, abandon the movie. In the end, the movie's making fun of us and our fickle tastes, and as it's over, daring to just let the system burn and give you something different, no matter what the result will be. But don't worry, even though the end looks bad, I'm sure the following year the Ancient Ones will settle back in and prep themselves for another Fast and Furious movie or whatever. Question number 3.
Was Kurt in on it?
One of the more prevalent theories about the film is the notion that Kurt, played by Chris Hemsworth, was in on the whole thing. The evidence is as follows. In the beginning, he says that they're going to his cousin's cabin, but Marty thinks that he doesn't even have one. Along the way, they have to encounter the Harbinger, and Kurt is the one driving and is the one that pulls over into the precise gas station they need to. Next, when they're in the basement, everyone picks up an item. He's the only one that grabs 2. He first has the conch, but then switches to the puzzle ball. Next, he takes Jules outside, away from the group, getting her to a secluded location. Much easier for the creatures to get their hands on her. It's said that later, when they are driving away in the RV, he could have driven slower to allow them time to blow the tunnel, and that he made a big speech before his big jump, mostly as him playing a part to make them feel better about what's going on and play up his hero role. They also posit that him having the dirt bike in the first place is evidence, since they just had a single bike, and it doesn't make a lot of sense to bring one dirt bike to a trip with your friends. They say that he actually thought he would be allowed to leave and that he was unaware of the force field and that his death was a surprise to him. So, I'll say this, it's an interesting theory, but really unlikely. The only real benefit that they get from this whole scenario is having his assistance in getting them to the cabin, and it seems like they had enough sway with the drugs and pheromones to set that up. Like, they already showed you that they had enough control over the way that they acted, to the point that they were just showing entirely different personality traits, like Holden acting geekier, and Jules embracing her wilder self. It's also capable of changing their actions and making them suggest splitting up. So, having Kurt believe he has a cousin with a cabin and making a stop for gas just doesn't seem like that big of a stretch. Plus, if he was really in control of things, then why speed off in the RV at all? There would be a lot of options for him to take to avoid getting the hell out of there. He could have just had them run into the woods, suggest they hide, fake that the engine won't start, anything except race towards that tunnel and hope that they seal it off, something that he possibly didn't even know that they could do. Like, if he wasn't aware that they would seal off the perimeter, why would he have knowledge that they could destroy that tunnel? Or even take the chance? Plus, if he was some sort of operative that the facility had in their pocket, I feel like they would have said something about that when things were going on, but they didn't. So it's clear that he was just another manipulated victim, just another regular guy. Okay, as much of a regular guy as friggin' Chris Hemsworth can be. Question number 4.
What were the archetypes in the Japanese scenario?
This one might be quick, because I think the answer is a little obvious, but I found several places around that questioned this, so I figured I should answer it. As I mentioned earlier, the Ancient Ones have specific archetypes that they want to see sacrificed, and it's a necessary enough component that the facility manipulates our mains into more closely fitting those roles. But then, when we see the Japanese attempt, it's a bunch of young schoolgirls. It doesn't really seem like they would fit the themes necessary and don't represent those archetypes. Like, I'm sure one or more are the scholar, and there's probably a jock in there, and they're likely all virgins, but what about the fool and the whore? Well, the answer here is that the director flat out states that the rules are different in each culture. And again, that stems back to what I was saying about the Ancient Ones being representative of us. The archetypes are different for different cultures because the expectations aren't the same from the horror crowd in terms of what they want to see in their films. They're sacrifices. We're never really told the expectations of the ritual from the Japan contingent, but it's likely that they have their own archetypes. The sort of things that you would see in J-horror, particularly the kind that was popular at that time. A side note, they say that Japan had a perfect record, whereas the US had only failed once, like I said, back in '98. That would seem to indicate that either Japan's efforts are what saved the day, or that some other country was successful as well. But we do know that Japan did have a winner that year, and I'll point out that Ringu was released in '98 and did feature more than 5 deaths, so it's very possible that Sadako helped save the world. Question number 5.
How did they not know that Marty was still alive?
This was a little more complex than I thought, because there's a point in the movie in which the audience thinks that Marty has been killed, fulfilling the second part of the sacrifice. And he's stabbed in the back as he's dragged down into a ditch, and we see blood spurt up. Right after, the guys down below signal the death is complete and pull a lever, and blood pours into the full symbol. As this happens, though, there's a rumbling seeming to indicate that the Ancient Ones are unhappy, and a while after, the guys from the operational crew say that there was a glitch and power reroute from upstairs, and right afterwards they discover that Marty isn't as dead as they previously thought, and that the ritual isn't complete. That seems like a really dumb mistake to make and pretty amateurish. With the whole world on the line, you would think that they would make sure that the guy was dead before indicating it. They had just seen him dragged into a hole, and that blood, of course, so it feels like a safe bet to figure that he's gone, but you'd also figure that they'd make absolutely sure of it, particularly when they didn't see the torture family member crawl back out. So, here's where this one gets a little tricky, because we know that they're monitoring everything that they do, and there's this little moment right after the swimming scene that shows all 5 of our kids and information about them. It seems to include their positioning within the cabin, but it also shows their vitals, including a heartbeat. Now, after Jules is killed, a little later on, we see that screen again, and her section has been marked with red, and the heartbeat monitor isn't moving. Now, this is very brief, but for a moment while they're driving away in the van, we see that screen again, and Marty's section is also marked in red, indicating that he is indeed dead. So it seems that over time, they've become very reliant on that technology to let them know when the crew had met their demise and trusted it to indicate that it was okay to pull that lever. But how did that thing show that he was dead with no heartbeat when he was very much alive? Well, it's clear from the fact that they were able to monitor things like their heart rates and pulse. They clearly had to have some sort of monitoring device on them, and it had to be personal. It couldn't just be something in the vicinity, since it had to monitor their hearts. And it wouldn't be in their clothes because they change a few times and they go swimming. So it seems like sometime before this whole weekend happened, they would have had to have them implanted with some sort of tracker. If they had the capability to drug them, which we know they did, there's a very likely chance that beforehand they had them implanted with some tiny device, possibly under their skin, to do this. I mean, Marty makes a joke about putting chips in people's heads at one point, so maybe that's even some sort of latent memory of it happening. But then, why did it say he had no heartbeat? The answer to that comes from that stab in the back, or possibly a different one that happens in the hole. But it's clear that before Marty gets the upper hand on the zombie thing, one of the wounds that Marty receives damages or destroys that implant, cutting off the signal and indicating to the facility that he was dead. Question number 6.
Hey, speaking of Marty, was that bong coffee mug real?
One of the most memorable moments of the film is when Marty, Stoner Supreme, first shows up, and he has with him a giant bong that he's taking hits from. There's some conversation about it, but it ends when Kurt states that Marty shouldn't bring it into his van in case they get pulled over, and then Marty simply collapses the thing down to the appearance of a standard coffee thermos. Now, that's actually a pretty great idea, and I don't partake, but I happen to know a certain Christie that does, and I'm sure that there's some viewers out there that do as well. So the question is, can you get yourself one of those? Especially because it has so many uses, since it's also a handy tool in stopping redneck torture zombies. So this was not some sort of product placement. This thing did not exist in reality before the film. It was a gag that was conceived at the script level, and they had to make the prop. Several versions of it were created, including one made of foam to use for that standoff moment, and indeed, there was one version that actually worked, and a person could drink from it as well as take some hits. That version is said to have cost $5,000 to make, and it wasn't like just that one cost $5,000, but the overall process of trying different prototypes until they came across one that actually functioned that cost that money. But they only made the one that worked, and I guess it remained with the prop department because Fran Kranz, who played Marty, didn't take it home with him, and still regrets that. But after the movie was released, stoners all over saw it and were like, I want that, but first I gotta get some chips. Well, it seems like a while ago someone decided that this would be a gold mine to actually produce, and back in 2014, a company called Iron Man Designs made a replica, a fully functioning replica, and it could be purchased for $80. However, there's no specific site remaining for that company, although there's another company that may actually be linked, and they were selling one at coffeemugpipe.com, but that domain is also unavailable, so it seems like they're just not in business anymore. I've looked around, and no one is currently making a version of it, and the only link that I could find where someone was selling one had it listed for a whopping $508. And do you know how much flour you can get for that? But I guess due to the loosening of laws concerning legal weed, the need to keep your bong hidden and covert is a lot lesser than it once was, so the need for something like that isn't what it was. But still,
Be kind of cool.
question number 7.
What was that red liquid?
This one will be quick, but earlier I mentioned that red fluid that signifies each of the sacrifices, and we see that it drains into representations of each of the archetypes. But what is that stuff? Clearly, it's meant to denote which of the victims were killed, and that a part of the ritual was complete, but is it just ceremonial? Since it's red, the first thought is that it's blood. But it's obviously not blood from the act itself. Like after Jules is killed, we see it pumped down. And I guess it's possible that someone brought a sample of it down and that's where they got that from. But that's not the case when Marty comes into question. Clearly, if they would have had to retrieve the blood from the time of death and they would have discovered that he wasn't dead, and there wasn't enough time for them to retrieve it from Holden, so that blood is not from the sacrifices at the time of sacrifice. So Maybe it's not blood and it's just some sort of red fluid that's mostly symbolic and it just needs to represent the death of the archetype, and even though it's necessary, it's not actual blood. But I do think that it's blood and actual stuff from the sacrifices, but not gathered during the time of death. Like I mentioned earlier, they've known for a while who their potentials were going to be, and this group was handpicked and shaped into being the people that they wanted. This was achieved through drugging them, and I've already stated that I think at some point they knocked them unconscious and implanted that monitoring device in them, so it would be a very simple task at that same time to draw some blood from each of them and store it for use in the ceremony. Question number 8.
Where do the monsters come from?
This one's interesting because this film has a variety of different type of creatures, and they include aliens, trees, mermen, the whole kit and caboodle. And what's a kit and caboodle anyway? I'm picturing a caboodle as this big basket, and all the kittens are just nestled inside of it. And then when you have this whole kit and caboodle, you're just really happy because you have everything you need right there, and happiness is at your fingertips.
And what? Kit and caboodle? Well, that's just dumb.
Anyway, in the film, they discuss the nature of the creatures, and Truman says that they're something from a nightmare. But Lynn corrects him and says that they're what nightmares are from. He then mentions that they're remnants of the old world, courtesy of you-know-who, and he's talking about the ancient ones, the old gods. That indicates that the evil forces that inhabit them have existed since the ancient times, and even the ones that are like a little bit more recent are vestiges of an older time moving through the ages. Like something like evil doctors wearing modern medical apparel wouldn't be ancient, but the dark forces that are in there and are just manifest differently through time. There's theories out there that the things are the pets of the ancient ones, but the clear answer is that they're bits of dark energy that remain left over from the time before our reign, when the demons still walked the earth, and likely would still go on after the ending of the film, since the world is theirs once again. Question number 9.
Where's the sequel?
The film cost $30 million to make and earned $70 at the box office, which makes it a success, but not a big one. But based on the home market sales and such, it's been rather profitable. But it's also critically acclaimed and beloved by fans. So why not a sequel? Well, when asked about this, the response was something along the lines of, "Have you seen the ending of this movie?" But this is Hollywood we're talking about. If they can end a movie with Michael Myers clearly having his head chopped off, and then make another movie and just be like, LOL, nope, then they can think of a way to continue this story. Maybe the ancient ones aren't as powerful against modern weaponry as they were old school ones. Maybe it could be a prequel, and we could see the 98 incident. Well, back in 2023, Drew Goddard, the film's director, talked about it and said that the ending makes a sequel difficult, but they actually had some ideas, although ultimately they just didn't want to do it. And they'd only do a follow-up if they thought it really needed one, and they just didn't. Oddly enough, there's also fan theories out there that claim that there is a sequel, and that it's the comedy film This Is the End. People have pointed out that the apocalypse there seems similar to the one here, and the creatures you see don't feel out of place with the Cabin universe. But I feel like that's just a reference, and that's a sick reference, and that movie's references are out of control. Everybody knows that. Question number 10.
What are all the monsters on that board?
Okay, here we go. Buckle up. There's a bunch of different monsters here, and there's also this big whiteboard displaying what we're gonna see. There's a werewolf, alien beast, mutants, wraiths, zombies, reptilians, clowns, witches, sexy witches, demons, hell lord, angry molesting tree, giant snake, deadites, Kevin, mummy, the bride, the scarecrow folk, snowman, dragon bat, vampires, dismemberment goblins, sugar plum fairy, merman, the reanimated, unicorn, Huron, Sasquatch, Wendigo, Yeti, dolls, the zombies, the doctors, zombie redneck torture family, jack-o'-lantern, giant, and twins! Now, the ZRTF we see all throughout the film, and they're the Buckners, and they're called up by the diary of one of them. But let's go down the list. First up is the werewolf, and he's featured prominently and is one of the first creatures we see in the glass cages. We also see him during the Purge, and he factors into the ending. However, his summoning item is never seen in the movie nor in the additional materials. The next on the list is the alien beast, and its item is also unknown, but it can be seen one time during the attack jumping on a guard. Next, it just says mutants, and that's a broad description, but they're these guys here in orange puking on one of the scientists. Next is the wraiths, and even though it said wraiths plural, we only ever see one of them, and it's featured a good deal with being one of the earliest things in the glass that they encounter and also flying around during the purge, although it's another one where they don't clarify which is the items that's connected. Then there's zombies, and they're an easy one to spot since they get a big hero shot right here, and they're also chowing down on people in this shot, but we also don't know their item. Next is Reptilius, and this is a hard one to spot because it only shows up one time, and it's this guy on a security monitor stalking a woman in a dark room. But again, we don't know his item. It then says clowns, and I don't think I have to point this one out. He gets a big moment, and again, it says clowns, but there's just one clown, and his item is the fortune-telling machine. We then have witches, but again, there's just one witch, and you see her in the doorway scene pulling a guard's soul out, and then later on a security monitor, but we don't see her item. But then there's also sexy witches, different than a witch, but we don't see them at all in the movie. It also says demons, and that's a broad statement, and we don't see anything in the film that specifically looks like a demon, so it could be one of the unnamed monsters in the cubes that we see. It's then the Hell Lord, and this guy gets a lot of screen time and is shown several times, and his item is that puzzle box. Next is the Angry Molesting Tree, and it's seen in the big elevator moment grabbing a guard, and it's also on a screen later, but we don't know its item. Another obvious one is the Giant Snake, which is clearly seen in the elevator bit and a couple of other times, but we don't see his item. The next one is interesting because it says Deadites, and it appears as if they're these hooded guys, and one is seen throwing this worker. Now, next it says Kevin, and we don't see Kevin in the film, but according to the novelization, he's just a regular guy who's really good at killing, and I guess has been mentioned by Goddard as possibly being the title character from We Need to Talk About Kevin. Some people also think that he's the character from Sin City. It's also thought that his item is the film reel that Marty is looking at. The next is a mummy, and he is surprisingly not in the movie, but he did show up in behind the scenes footage, so they did make him, but I guess just cut around him. This next one is intriguing because it's the bride, but I guess she's not in the movie, but her item is, since we see a wedding dress with a necklace attached. Then we have the Scarecrow folk, and these guys are in the movie, and they're the ones that take out Truman, and their totem items are shown as a pitchfork, some hay, and a scarecrow. The Snowman is the next one on the board, and this is one that's absent from any aspect of the film and is only just mentioned here. But we then have the Dragon Bat, and that sucker's all over the ending, and you can spot it several times. Next one down is the vampires, but again, there's only one shown, and you can see him on a monitor, and he's vaguely Nosferatu-like. I love the name of this next one as it's the Dismemberment Goblins, and you can see one of them for a second on a monitor while they're still in the cubes. But you can also see them a few times during the purge, notably in the big elevator moment, and the red one is flying around. Next is the Sugar Plum Fairy, and she's probably one of the most known ones since she was featured heavily when they first discover the monsters and also several times in the purge, and her item is the music box, and she was almost called up by Holden. After that, of course, is the Merman, and we only get to see him one time, but boy, does he make it count. Also, Kurt almost calls him up by blowing the conch. Okay, this one's weird because it now just says the Reanimated, and these guys are different than the zombies, I guess? And it looks like they crawl on the walls and ceilings, and you can see them in the security monitor, but then once during the purge as well. After that is the Unicorn. I think you know which one that is. But next is the Huron, and he's essentially a sort of native character, and you can only see him for the briefest of seconds as they're searching for Marty and Dana in the monitors. It then says Sasquatch Wendigo Yeti, and you can't really see him in the film. He's apparently on one of these monitors, but too small to see. Then it says Dolls, And these guys are the people that look like the strangers, and we see them a few times actually, and their item is one of their masks. Next is the doctors, and again, they're self-explanatory, but we see them several times during the Purge. The redneck zombie family are next, and we talked about them already, but then there's Jack-o'-lantern, and you can see him really quickly in the monitor, and then later when he's shooting fire out of his mouth. One more down the list is Giant, and this one isn't in the film, but I guess behind the scenes they made a giant, as well as a giant woman, but they didn't make the finished product. And then the final listing is the twins, and you see them a few times. They're in the glass cages, but they're also on the screens a couple of times. So that's a lot of monsters, but there's more in there that no one bet on.
So there you have it, 10 questions about Cabin in the Woods answered up. This is a very deep movie full of questions, full of commentary, full of satire, meta stuff, so there's lots of questions to be had. Let me know if you have any other ones. Let me know if you have any alternate answers to the questions that I have posed right here. Tell me that down below in the comments. I'd like to hear it. If you didn't like my answers, tell me what yours was. Also, if you like this video, please hit that like button. If you like the channel, subscribe to it. And also, check out my Patreon page, patreon.com/movietimelines, and help support this channel. And I'll see you very shortly for another great video. Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.